Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for another open session at ICMI 21. We have my regular co-host, Natalie. Everyone, as I asked Natalie to introduce herself in a previous session, she just said everyone knows who I am, so there we are. And today we've got Rod Lonsdale with us. So Rod, would you like to introduce yourself? Just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you've been doing.
Hello, I'm Rod. You might have seen a few videos of me. I'm one of the guys at Speaker's Corner in London. That's an anti-feminist. We've been doing that for about 6 or 7 years. My original call out to get people offline and to do things, the original one was in 2010, which didn't pick up. But it was 2012 we picked up. And back then we were a group, quite a big group. And then after that eventually came to an end. And we ended up going to Speaker's Corner. One of my colleagues said, come to Speaker's Corner. So we did, and we've been there ever since. And we have a lot of the original people from our group. And we speak publicly, and it's an historical site. So you can say often, you can speak there like you couldn't at a university or anywhere else.
There's some sort of a right to speak at Speaker's Corner in the UK, isn't there? Some sort of special status that it has, is that right?
It does have special status. We did have a police officer who was very good, who looked after us.
Oh, good.
Who looked after everyone. We've been taken over by religious people in many respects, but it's always been political and religious. But we tend to have less political now, and a lot of Muslim people come there, and some are moderate, some are quite radical. And we have Christians turning up now, lots of Christians at times. So, I mean, it turns into a bit of a zoo in the afternoon. But we get there about 10:30, and you know, it's good.
So yeah, so basically, you're something along the lines of the whole bunch of speakers all sort of lined up, maybe a couple of meters apart or something like that, are they? And all talking about them giving their message.
Yeah, well, you can take a ladder. There's a lot of crazy people there. There's occasionally violence with the religious people in the afternoon, but it's safe. We don't really upset too many people. Feminists tend to avoid us. We had Posey Parker coming, the one who's a TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminists, and there were rad femmes there as well. And they now go somewhere else because they think they need a woman's space, so they don't actually speak at Speaker's Corner. Because Hatan was stabbed by a radical Muslim, or attempted stabbing of a Christian woman. So they make out they'd say that men are violent and it's not safe for women, but it has nothing to do with that. It was actually religious extremism. Yes. So, and of course, Hatan was okay. She survived it, obviously, hardly injured at all. So, yeah.
Actually, I think I may have remember that being reported on the news here. Actually, I think it was quite big news.
It was. We weren't there at that. That was out because we go every fortnight. That was not our weekend.
Right. Well, I'm sorry to hear there was violence there, but I'm glad that you're able to get your message out there. It's interesting. The feminists then have completely withdrawn from Speaker's Corner. It's quite interesting. So yeah, so you've got the same group who's been going there about 6 or 7 years. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
What was that? Sorry, Rod?
Over 6. Yeah, I don't know if we quite say 7.
So there is a Speaker's Corner in Sydney, and I think there may actually be one in other Australian cities. We've really just copied off London. That's the reality. But I don't think that it is anywhere near the activity actually that yours does, which is a shame actually, because I think it's a really interesting idea. And yeah, you mentioned about 2010 and 2012. I think this is when you were originally talking about getting people out in person, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Did you send an email? You were saying.
Well, I found a website which I thought was an English one, and I was wrong. It was an American one, and that's what I put the call out on. But of course, British people saw it, and we didn't have the censorship that we do now. And we had people come, meet up, and we had women and men, and we had quite big groups. And we used to meet. Actually, the thing is, for us, and it's always the case, finding a venue is one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
And I used to try and find us venues where we could actually go and use it for free, and be able to chat. And we used pubs, and of course we had the South Bank Centre, which at that time all the mezzanine floors had tables and chairs on it. So I'd go up there and put my jacket round and my bag on another chair and hog a loaded few tables so that no one could take them. And I'd wait for people to come. A bit nervous because people would be wanting to sit down, and I'd be, I'd grab this table, a couple of tables. But I mean, Mike Buchanan came about 2012. It's when we first met him, just before he started the party.
Very good. So we did something similar in Australia a little bit later. So around about 2013, 2014 was probably when it was really kicking off. Men's Rights Sydney was founded in 2012, and they did the same thing. They started going to pubs and so forth, and they had an interesting strategy. They put a Rubik's Cube on the table, and so if people who were coming up didn't have to ask, "Oh, where's the Men's Rights Sydney meeting?" They just had to look for the cube, which I thought was really, really quite brilliant. But they had problems with venues as well in Sydney, and they got complaints from feminists and got booted out a couple of times. And they've done very, very well. So in my local area, Brisbane, which is in the state of Queensland, we've also been running meetings since around about 2013. So I felt the meetings were important. I don't know how you feel about it, but I felt building community and fellowship was an important part of getting to know each other in person, not just online and so forth. And so, well, we've been running barbecues in Queensland. So that's been our thing.
Yeah. Well, the big kickoff that was for us, and so we're doing all the talking. Sorry, Natalie.
Good.
The big kickoff for us was the fact that we had there was a small charity called Parity. And the average age there was over 80, and they were basically closing down a charity which had done a lot of stuff in the past, legal stuff as well. They were very gentlemanly, and we would go to that. We would go once a year to that, and of course we met a bloke who was an ex-Fathers for Justice guy who was a lecturer and an author, and he said, "We've got to do something. We've got to start bringing people together." So then we started having mandate meetings, which were to network in Britain with all the different people, from really quite important people working in domestic violence and that. So we'd have these big meetings once a month or so.
Good.
And that brought together so many people. And then the International Men's Day sort of started from that. And then something, I can't remember what it's called. We started having a conference as well, a mini conference. And of course, Mike Buchanan was doing the international conferences, and we were working with that. I mean, when his first conference, in I think 2016, it was a huge advantage that we had in London, was because so many of us knew each other.
Yeah.
And Mike had a lot of volunteers on hand. Other people didn't have.
So go on. Yeah.
Other people didn't have that.
Absolutely. So I was actually at the 2016 conference, and I was really impressed at how many volunteers Mike had actually. In fact, now I think about it, we probably met in person there actually. Were you at the registration desk? I have a feeling.
Yep. I do recall you a little bit visually.
Yeah. So I actually made the trip over. I was a delegate for Voice for Men at that conference, and it was absolutely fabulous. You all did very, very well. And we then went on to run ICMI 17 the following year on the Gold Coast here. And I actually used the ICMI conference, these 16 conferences, as a bit of a model. Our schedule, for example, was based on the way the ICMI 16 schedule worked, because I was really impressed by by how it worked. You had talks and plenty of time for people to sort of just chat and network, because part of the reason you go to a conference, a physical conference, is to meet people. But there's also, is to attend talks, but also is meeting people. So there was plenty of time to talk, and that's what we did. So yeah, I was really impressed by how 2016 ran, and I gather 2018 was along a similar line, although I wasn't able to get away, unfortunately, and go back. But
I did a lot more on the 16. On the later one, I'd had too much to drink sometimes, but I wasn't so needed at that one. I don't drink anymore, thankfully. But we were at Golders Green doing an anti-circumcision protest, and of course Mike had such a problem finding venues, and the only venue we could find was such an expensive one, but we had loads of security and hotels near. So and Mike was in the beginning, the cost of the place, and of course not many people have bought tickets yet. And then we all went for a beer after we had our protest. And I just said to everybody, look, we're going to have to do something to help Mike.
Yeah.
And there were so many people there who were just actively doing something. Yeah. And it's one of the things is finding, we've recently got another guy who's now just, as soon as he turns up, he's now doing stuff.
Right.
It can be a little bit of a rare thing to find someone who comes along who's self-motivated, who will just start doing whatever he's doing. After the mandate meetings, we had younger people, and the networking that I did, they left me for dust, basically, because they were younger and they were on all different other platforms, and they were doing stuff that I never even knew was happening. Yeah. And it was a delight to just see happening around us. We actually need something like that again. There needs to be a kickstart. Absolutely.
And in fact, you make a really good point there about getting people who are self-motivated. Is absolutely true that there are we found this in A Voice for Men too, particularly after the Red Pill was released. There are a lot of people who put their hand up to volunteer. Only a small proportion of those people ever really did much, and a lot of them sort of bailed within a few weeks. Then they realised it was hard work, and really wasn't. You didn't get a lot of they didn't get an applause from the wider community. In fact, you probably ended up with a lot of hate. So.
But if you're doing it for that reason, you've either got to be one of our top people and be really, really good, or otherwise you're going to be one of Santa's helpers. And that's, you can't be in it looking for ego or anything like that. The whole ego is in the excitement is the fact that we're getting the truth out there and we're helping people.
Exactly.
We have battalions and battalions of armchair experts who will often tell you at times and criticize people, and yet you can the sky, you can see them going to the skyline. There's thousands of them, but whether or not they're actually going to do anything, and I'm losing patience at times with people who will start arguing or won't like someone because they personally don't, but they don't take into account what this person's been doing for years. And the fact that they're even there, that the complaint is even there, has everything to say with the platform they're standing on was built by these people.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I feel like saying, get over yourself. Okay, you don't like him, who cares? Yeah. Have a look at what this guy or woman's been doing. Get over it.
I can really identify. That really resonates with me, because we also have armchair experts, and there are lots of people who will tell us how to fix the problems. So as long as we do what they say, it'll all be sorted. To which I always have a standard response for and say, don't tell me how to do it. Show me. If you can do this, what you're saying, and it really does work, we will adopt your method. Yeah. Okay, but they don't do that. That's too much like hard work. It's much easier to sit there and pontificate and tell us how to do it all.
Easy to criticize.
Yes, exactly.
I said this. I think it was on our first Q&A during ICMI. Anne Widdecombe was like, "Why don't men fight back when they're getting attacked, or why don't they protect themselves?" And it's like, because they can't. As soon as they do, they then become the perpetrator. And it didn't matter how many ways it was twisted to tell her this. She just couldn't get it through her head. So it's easy to criticize, but it's not easy to actually understand and do the job.
Exactly. So we did a sort of informal analysis of our volunteers in A Voice for Men and the Australian Men's Rights Association, and we just looked at the characteristics they had, the ones that stuck it out and the ones that didn't. And the thing that really shone through for us, again, this was just an informal assessment, but the thing that really shone through for us is the people who stuck it out had spent a lot of time reading about the issue, 6 to 18 months actually, before they put their hand up to get involved. And the people who sort of, watched the Red Pill and got really fired up, and then, now let me say that the Red Pill's been absolutely fantastic for the men's rights movement. It really has. It's opened things up for us. But there was a sort of a group of people who saw it. It happened in other ways too, but a lot of them saw the Red Pill, got really fired up, and they jump in and they're burned out within a few weeks. So the people who sat there and read about it and for a long time, they were the ones who stuck it out, we found.
Yeah, not me. I fell in and just kept on falling.
Fair enough. Yes.
I go off. I think a lot of people know that I go off emotion and logic. like, it triggers me when I see, especially on social media, when I see a comment that's sexist. And I've always said, excuse me, I'm no more MRA than I am a feminist. I believe in equality. I'm just fighting it from the men's side because that's the side that's not getting heard.
Yep. And I fully agree with that. I've said if I lived in a different time, I may well have taken there'd be a different group of people that I'd be fighting for. But in this particular time, these are the ones, it's men and boys who need the problems addressed. So just mentioning, Carl said part of the issue with Anne's comment is that she never lived 1 second as a male. Yes, it's interesting. To look
and
at,
she's also very confident, very well educated, came through the education system when it was in a good place, may come from a better family. She's very logical. She's not what you call the average woman. She's quite famous over here, but you can see she's got things that she doesn't have a clue about.
Yeah.
And she's really out of her depth when she's talking about a couple of things, and she doesn't know it.
Yes.
But with any luck, she'll read what they suggest that she have a look at, William Collins's book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dare I say,
of course,
so go on, you go on. Yeah.
Oh, you were saying one of the other things that makes someone who's going to stay forever is in the men's rights movement and make it part of their life is the fact that they've suffered.
Yeah.
But it's not really a place for extremists either.
No,
the
right.
men's rights movement, because they'll upset everyone else and they'll end up running out, with their ideological hammer, and then they burn out.
Yep. In fact, we've seen a number of, that's exactly what happens. I made the point actually during Anne's talk, Anne Whittaker's talk. I was just participating in the audience at the time as an attendee, but the feminism has allowed extremists to rise to the top. We tend to push them to the side. And we've had a lot of cases, I won't name names, but here in Australia, we've had a lot of people who've come in and basically tried to take over, and there's a natural process where they kind of get pushed to the side. Some of them are more extreme than others even, but we don't allow extremists to go into those senior positions. So it tends to, I'd say moderates tend to percolate to the top. That's been my experience.
Well, kind of the secret to the success of our group is I'm not an alpha male, obviously, people can see. So I don't rule like that. I don't have the skills to, and if I tried, it would fail. But when Mike Buchanan came to our group years ago, and I've said this before, he said, well, because Mike is a lot more laid back than he used to be. He used to be a lot more serious before he started the party. He wanted to sort this out. And of course, now he realizes it's a long, I mean, he probably knew then, but he says, what are you guys doing? And I said, well, the thing that we're here for is we want to get offline and meet up with people in person and make contacts in the community. And he kind of still said, what are you doing? And one of my colleagues stated, he says, well, basically, we're all here, but we're the kings of our own castles. And we work together on what we like. And if we don't get on or we don't like it, we detach. And one of the biggest problems is, unless you're one of the people, a high achiever, and you come in academically with your work and you own it and no one else can take it or claim it's theirs, it's possession. People have a big problem with owning stuff and possession. So if you don't really have anything to possess, then you have less problems. And the other thing that I've always avoided was trying to raise money, which needs to be done. But there's no point me trying to raise money for anything because I wouldn't know what I was doing and I wouldn't be able to hold on to it. And then other people would come in and try and take control of it. So, and I happen to know my limits.
Yeah.
And so, and what it's done is, and I don't dominate people. So people come along if they want to come and they don't feel like they're being made to come.
Yeah. Now that resonates with me too, again, actually, in our experiences in Australia and even on the international level. We hear a lot of people say things like, oh, there needs to be one overarching body for men's rights around the world and so forth. And when I first got involved, I thought along those lines too. But before long, I realized that what we've really got is a stable equilibrium where there are small groups, which I think this is what you're getting at as well. There are small groups and the groups come together to work together when it's appropriate to do so. And that seems to work. For example, ICMI, there are 3 distinct groups operating this. So, and it works. It works for us.
And in any field, you can get experts in their fields, and they tend to stay in their fields. But the ICMI thing is, what it's doing is it brings in experts from other fields who might only come to one conference and they'll have their say. But I mean, when you look at Gamergate and then the atheists, what do they call it, when that got taken over by
Atheism Plus?
Yeah, and there was another name for it back then, and it brought Sargon Backhead and Carl Benjamin and all these different people have been feminists. Like Alison says, for the honey badger, feminists can be our best friends because they bring in people who become our allies. And one of the biggest problems that people have why they don't get on is because they expect everyone who comes along should agree with everything that they agree with.
Yeah, they
can't actually rub along together and think, okay, well, this guy's really good or this woman's really good at that. But I think that's a load of rubbish. But instead of attacking them, they'll say, well, I won't discuss that with them. And maybe, and I'll give them some evidence and maybe they'll change their tune on it. But once you start fighting over parts of minor things, it just disrupts everything. You've got to learn to rub along together as a group, different groups. And I mean, that's what, I mean, the spectrum of feminism. I mean, they're all fighting like anything if you give them half the chance, but they're prepared to glue together mainly because of the financial benefits and their bigotry.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that Alison Court said they can be friends. I like to refer to the feminism as the marketing department. So a very high proportion of people who are in the men's rights movement first heard about the men's rights movement from feminism, and I am among those people. The first time I ever heard of Voice for Men, which I'm now involved with, have been for many years, the first time I ever heard about it was feminists dissing Paul Elam. And I said, well, what's this about? I think I shall go and look myself and make my own mind up. And I did. And I was just shocked at what I found. And within a year, I spent about 6 months reading hard. And then I gradually increased my involvement over another few months. So, yep, I like to think of them as the marketing department. So those feminists need to keep going out there, keep dissing us and bringing numbers in.
Well, even if we were funded, we couldn't pay for someone like Big Red.
That's right. Absolutely. Yes. So
stunning.
Oh my God. No, I don't have the same colour as her. Okay.
I trust everybody who's seen the red pill and knows who Big Red is. So
I started to freak out. I was like, no, I'm not her.
That's right.
Well, she was Scarlet. She was Vicious Scarlet. You're kind of a funny
exactly. That's right. Yes. Oh, good memories. Yes.
I remember Dan. I think Dan was the guy with the beard. And I emailed him a few times, and he's one of the key people there talking to her and, shut the fuck up and all the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That was interesting for me because the two big talks that really brought a lot of notice in 2012 were one talk by Warren Farrell and one by Janice Fiamengo at the University of Toronto. I actually used to work. I actually used to work at the University of Toronto, although I resigned in 2000, a little bit earlier than that. But anyway, yes, I found it really interesting that the University of Toronto was such a focus point of events, but it certainly has been. So you wanted to talk about action. Doing stuff.
Do you know what got me off my butt was before I started and when I first started, I was actually very unwell, and I was a mess, and my life was a terrible state. And I was watching when A Voice for Men started, when Paul Elam, it started being called that from the other things in the past. He was involved with something else before. Yeah. And he used to work with a guy called John the Other, and they kind of came to an end of their working relationship. But John the Other was out there, and they had Creepy Bitter Girl. And John the Other went out there, and he got permission to put a few posters up about men's rights. And of course, along turns this academic feminist who was then called Creepy Bitter Girl, and they're flying monkeys. And they basically started tearing down the pictures in front of him using box cutters, as they call them in America, blade knives. And I remember thinking, because I used to write to people, oh, could you help me? Maybe you could help me write something about men's rights. And I was one of those people who was a, you know, little whiny person who I couldn't even sort myself out. And then from all of that, when John the Other went out there, I thought, well, there's a responsibility for me to do something here. And considering the state I was in, and I decided, well, I'm going to try and do something. So I put a call out to a men's rights for people to meet offline. And it was scary. But I did it. And I already knew one person who is a rather interesting character. And he's the one who sued the London School of Economics, Tom Martin. And a lot of people had a bit of a problem with him. And he was a difficult character. He was in the group to start with, but because he deconstructs things. And we never got anywhere because of that. And in the end, I had to say, look, Tom, you know, you're going to have to go. You're making people, they want to kill you, you know, some of our members. And I occasionally talk with him. We're still friends and things like we were. He's an interesting character, but he sued the London School of Economics. Man, Woman, Myth, Roland was there filming it. I was meant to be there, but I got my dates mixed up with work, so I missed out.
Oh, no.
And yeah, but it's on film, and I sent it to Roland recently. It'll be in there with all his stuff on his computer. And so I've lost my point, really. Yeah, you've got to get out there. And it's really nerve-wracking. So, I mean, we're now in a position, it's so much easier for people, even though we've got the censorship and all the rest of it, and your job's on the line, it always was. Even get back to 2010 by doing this sort of stuff, if you've got a certain job. But we've now got platforms like XY Crew. You can now meet people online and then get to trust them. You know, you get a sense of trust to know who the person is, so it's not somebody trying to subvert the movement. And if they're anywhere near where you live, if you can, meet up with them, please. Or at least just start having Zoom meetings with them if they're in your area. Start doing something, because I wouldn't have been able to go to Speaker's Corner by myself. And I had a big gang of people to go with, and we went.
It is
we
easier.
kept an eye on each other.
Yeah, it's easier if you've got that emotional support. Even just other people being there provides a form of support.
Well, it was really nasty to start with. We were called that we lived in our mother's basements, that we were misogynists, and they were really aggressive to us. A lot of guys were too. We got a lot of abuse, and we hadn't learned how to speak confidently in public. A lot of us hadn't quite yet. So we can now deal with it a lot better than we did then. And of course, one of the big problems was when you go do public speaking is to get people to stop, because people go there for entertainment as well. And if you're there and you haven't got the energy, people just walk past you. So there's a skill, and it's the deepest end to go into, because Speaker's Corner is a complete zoo full of heckling and all the rest of it. So it's the best place to learn. But there's also Toastmasters, which is all over the world. I haven't gone to one yet, but a lot of people recommend it for public speaking.
That's right. They'll teach you how to public speak. Exactly. That's right. Yes. So yeah, your experiences in the UK, I think, are fairly similar to ours. I don't know what your feeling on it is, but in terms of the vitriol, we still get vitriol, but I would say that sort of, 7, 8, 10 years ago, I'd say it was probably worse than it is now. So that's certainly our experience too. And getting events, it's still difficult, but it was more difficult in the past. So I think there is a normalization going on, acceptance as the years go by, and we are, as you say, getting better at presenting the arguments and so forth. I mean, it used to be. Go on.
We never used to have the language.
That's right.
We had Karen Strawn. We've got all these different people who are wonderfully articulate, and we've now got the language that we never had to explain things which are really quite hard to explain because they're invisible to us. It's part of our culture, the gynocentrism.
And actually, I run a site called Wiki for Men, and one of the it has a glossary, and the idea with Wiki for Men is to just build that glossary into a complete set of terminology and so forth. So if anyone wants to submit anything to that, you're welcome to have an account. Otherwise, you can contact me, and we'll put that on the site, as long as it's obviously on topic. And you can, things like, you know, the apex fallacy or whatever it happens to be, it helps people with the terminology. And I think it's been proving to be a useful resource.
I have a freestanding thing with posters behind me, and it's got loads on, and it has the terms from the dictionary, gynocentrism, hypergamy, and all the rest of it. I've even got virago there, which is the worst type of woman in the world, and that's an old word in the dictionary. And I've got a listing of what it means. It means witch, bitch, battle axe, all these different things. It's my naughtiest poster, and nobody's written it down yet. And those are props for if no one's stopping, and people take photographs of them.
Right.
And they've been there for years. I mean, they're really moth-eaten, a bit like myself when I'm up there, but it works. I mean, people like to age things and make them look shabby chic. My posters are that because they've been in the rain and everything else for years, and it's really good. I mean, I thought I lost my poster because I've got one on Greg Ellis's book on the front of my ladder now, I couldn't find it the other night, and I thought it was lost. And it wasn't. It had actually slipped under something, and I was so grateful to have found it, because I can't get my computer to print things off at the moment with my printer, so I couldn't make a new one. And I was rather grumpy yesterday because of it, but then I found the poster. But they are props, and it can be very difficult sometimes if you're not got the energy to speak, or this. And the trouble is it because it turns into a zoo with arguments, between religious arguments, and there's a lot of screaming and carrying on in the afternoon. Having a conversation is a lot more difficult. And so, you know, this sort of stuff helps. And my posters do actually put people off as well. Most people who come to speak to me think I'm a misogynist and a traditionalist, and they're quite angry with me. And I just expect that. And it's actually quite amusing.
Yeah.
I had a really interesting, I had two women from New Zealand come. And I said, well, I was born in New Zealand. And they go, oh my God, how embarrassing. And I come to Speaker's Corner, and there's a New Zealand anti-feminist. And I thought that was really funny. One of the women had a malicious father, and the other one was a feminist. So she was a victim because she's a woman. But I spoke to the woman who suffered all her childhood because of her father's behavior. And she actually ended up with kind of tears in her eyes, because she understood that I was saying things about abusive parents. Yep. The other one then got frustrated and pulled her away, but they both took one of Mike's leaflets from me before they went. And of course, people were watching.
Yes, that's it exactly. People are watching. Yes. And
you don't actually talk to feminists. One of my colleagues says they're basically a teaching implement for everyone else. You let them spiral out of control and make every accusation and blame and everything else at you, and just let them get on with it. And screechy. I mean, often I get young girls, a row of them, and they'll all be screaming at once, and you'll have to ask them to, pipe down for a minute while I can hear what you're trying to tell me.
I was going to say, have you considered taking earplugs? Because I've actually thought about possibly carrying a pair with me. But I like to say I'm talking to feminists, but I'm speaking to everybody else. It's not really the feminists I'm hoping will change. It's, as you say, it's people. And I've got feedback over the years that people see that we're being reasonable and they're being unreasonable. So people do notice these things. So we do have a couple of questions here, a couple of comments. So first of all, Dean says, Rod, I put up a GoFundMe account for anyone who could present me with one real example of oppressive patriarchy. I offered $500 and no one gave me an example I couldn't debunk. Very good. And we've also got a comment from Dean. He says, do you have gender mandering in Wiki for Men? I believe we do have that term in there, but I have made a note of it to check. So thank you very much. I think it is in the Wiki.
Can you say it again? I didn't quite catch that.
Gender mandering.
Oh, what does that mean?
Dean, do you want to have a go at explaining that? You have to type it, I guess.
Elevated music.
It's a reference to gerrymandering, which is, as I understand, it's a reference to gerrymandering, where gerrymandering is a political, I don't know if you have that word in the UK, but it's a political process where a minority, essentially the size of the electoral boundaries are manipulated so the government can be elected with a minority of seat, a minority of the population actually, and so it's an unequal distribution. And my understanding of gendermandering is that it's an application of that to gender. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that, Dean.
Sorry, I thought you said mandarin.
Gendermandering. Yes. I can actually check Wiki for me and see if I'm pretty sure I made a note about it. I know I made a note about it, but I'm not sure if I finished the article.
I find because of my born in New Zealand, my accent, I'd say from New Zealand, we don't have many vowels. Yeah. And I find it very hard sometimes to pronounce things. And it affects my spelling as well, because the way I say it isn't the way it's spelled, because we don't, and with Mandarin, even then I'm not saying it properly, Mandarin. See, it sounds like Mandarin to me as well.
Yes. So, yeah, Dean said, yes, moving the lines to favour women. Yeah, so it's basically an application of gerrymandering to gender, such as funding, right, yes. And I've made a note to put an entry in Wiki for Men, but the entry isn't there yet. So I'll use that as a source to add the entry in. So we're going for time. Yes, we've got it. Go on.
Do you know what's happening now?
Go on.
Is more people are beginning to recognise the corruption, the malignance, and the greed and the selfishness of feminism.
Yes.
They're really beginning to see that, because it's very hard for humans to actually picture women as being horrendously evil. And even those of us who have experienced it in childhood and other things, or as adults, it's still very hard to stamp it in your mind to see it. It's very easy to see that men are that. I mean, if every film we had a villain, a sociopathic or psychopathic female villain in it, and they are actually getting that way a little bit, it would be easier to understand.
Feminists will argue that there aren't enough women being shown in media or in TV or in movies, and then complain when the woman is the villain. Well, one way you're going to see more women on the screen is to have more women acting in a negative way, because drama is principally driven from conflict. So, and feminism was never known for its internal consistency.
Yeah. Well, they did.
Go on. Sorry. Go on.
Wasn't there a movie? I think it was Dunkirk a few years ago, where the feminists said there's not enough women in this.
Yes.
And it was based on a true story where there was no women. It was based on a true World War II conflict.
Yes, it was about the evacuation of Dunkirk of the British, French, and Belgian armies, etc., during World War II. And yes,
where there was no women. But my argument back, and the original was made in the 30s, 40s, called The Women, and there was a remake in the 2000s where there was no men in the movie. There was references to men, but everybody you saw in the movie was female.
Yeah, that's a progressive movie then, isn't it?
Yeah, but the original was like back in the 40s. So they're saying that. Right. They're saying that there's no women-only movies, and I was like, yeah, there is.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And you're going to have women in those roles if you're going to. Well, I mean, it's probably a little bit off topic, although it does relate to the UK. But like a lot of people, I enjoyed Game of Thrones, and I wrote an article about it. There's a bit of a spoiler, I guess, but it's years after the series has run now. But I wrote an article. A lot of people were really unhappy with the ending, and they argued because one of the female characters really sort of lets loose, and it hurts a lot of people at the end. And a lot of feminists really objected to that. And they argued that it was there. But in actual fact, if you look at this character through the 8 years of the series, and I wrote an article about this, and since then I found even more examples. It's pretty much what she was like. And there were plenty of hints that, given the opportunity, that she'd hurt a lot of people, and she did. And the feminists were really upset about that. But here we have a major female character. The other thing I want to say about Game of Thrones too is that the feminists about season 6 or 7 were absolutely crowing about how great it was that all the major houses were run by women. The principal reason this was the case is because all the men were dead. So I suppose that's pretty consistent with their worldview. I suppose they're quite happy, stepping over a bunch of dead bodies to have the men on top. So it's art following life.
Well, one of the memorable characters I saw, and I usually hate remakes because they make them progressive, but they did Lost in Space, Netflix did.
Yeah.
And the villain on the ship, who was played by a really camp guy in the past in the TV series, was now a woman. And she was a sociopath, a cold one.
Yes.
And she manipulated everyone, and it was done brilliantly, because if a lot of people may not have met someone like that, well, most people have, but they don't recognize it. But if you got something like that close to you, you realize it's a real type, and it was done beautifully. And of course, the series is still going. I don't get Netflix anymore. I mean, mate doesn't. I mean, because I don't have a telly. But I think it's going to be really good. And
yes,
I heard I heard the Game of Thrones was actually pretty brilliant with the characters in it. I've never seen it.
I'd recommend watching it, and do watch the character of Daenerys Targaryen from the beginning, and just take a note of her character. And anyway, yes. So I've also watched the Lost in Space remake. I enjoyed the first couple of series. I'm not as convinced about the third series, but you're right. Dr. Smith is a woman rather than a man.
Yeah.
Remake, and I think it probably did work well. And she's pathological, absolutely pathological.
Yeah.
I want to mention one other series too. We have to be wrapping up in a few minutes, but since we've moved on to TV, but British TV, so I think that's okay, because we were talking about the UK. I was a big fan of Blake Seven when I was a kid. Now, yeah. Now, it was big in Australia and the UK, not very well known in North America. I think also New Zealand. I suspect it was been there. Anyway, the main villain in the series is a woman, and she's just cold, but she's cold while being well dressed.
Was it Silverlin? Was it Silverlin or something?
Serverlin. Jekyll and Pierce was the actress. Serverlin was the character. Yep. And Serverlin was absolutely cold. I mean, she just disposed of people who were in her way. Yeah. And they used to complain about lack of female representation, but here the British were making this great series, and they made the bad guy a woman, and she was and to this day she's really an archetypical villain. She's very, very, very good. So anyway,
I met someone who met the actress in a line at the employment centre.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
Yeah, poor Jacqueline. So we've got a comment from Dean. Yep. So a good example of gendermandering would be the Outlander series, another good series, where they made a point to discuss filming a rape scene. If the woman, they made a good point to discuss filming a rape scene. Right, so they did not discuss, right, okay, yeah. So Dean's saying that, yeah, there was, in Outlander, which is a British, I think it might be a British-American series, but set primarily in the UK, about a woman who travels back, initially a woman who travels back in time. I watched that, actually, I quite liked it. But it is true, there's female rape of a woman in the series, there's also a rape of a man. And Dean's just making the point how they approach them very differently. So that's a very good point, actually. So we are heading towards our deadline, so we probably should wrap up. Thank you very much, Rod. I've got something.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rod. Thank you very much, Nat. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. Like the other Q&As, this will be processed in the near future and put up on YouTube for people to look at. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Good night. Bye-bye.